Leap of Fate podcast fans. Welcome to this week's episode with yours truly, as always, Randy Silver. This week, we have a very special episode for you. It's all around DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you remember, a couple of weeks back, I posted about me going to a conference called HR Transform, and it was all about DEI, as long as many other HR trends and how HR is transforming in the modern workplace. I met a really intelligent, bright, thoughtful CEO, someone who I consider my friend now. Her name is Kellie Wagner there, and she runs her own DEI company. She's CEO, and she's here today to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, Kellie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
So happy to have you here. And one of the reasons I want to bring Kellie on is, I find her very inspirational. I've always thought about starting my own company. She's out there doing it, especially as a woman founder in a very much male-generated, male-dominated type of world, can be very intimidating. So I'd love for her to come on today, talk about what it's like to be a woman founder, inspire all the women out there, listen to this podcast, how they can go make their own company. Also, talking about what is DEI, what is diversity, equity, and inclusion, how's in the workforce, and how can people out there make the most equitable workforce for their employees around the world, ensure that everyone's included and you're not diversity based off of your skin, potentially religion, equity. What does that mean? Inclusion. How do you make everybody feel all together, especially if your workforce around the world? If your workforce has different beliefs, how can you make that all happen together? So Kellie runs a business that helps businesses understand how they can enact DEI inside their business. So that being said, I don't think we need to dive much deeper. I hope you're all ready to get Leap of Fate going. Kellie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Awesome. Is there anything else in the intro you feel like I missed that's important for the fans to know before we dive into it?
No, I think you covered it all.
Perfect. I'm pretty good at doing my homework. So with that being said, just to give the lay of the land, can you introduce yourself to the fans, who you are, your upbringing, and how you got yourself into the DEI space?
Sure. So like Randy said, my name's Kellie Wagner, and I am the founder and CEO of Collective, which is a diversity, equity, and inclusion company that I started about 4.5 years ago. Prior to that, I was working in the tech space. I had also worked in a couple other sort of random jobs, marketing, at a branding agency doing account management. But most of my experience had been in the tech startup space. And I think that really created sort of the seed of thinking for me around DEI, because for so many of the startups that I worked at, they were growing really quickly. They had a younger audience younger workforce who was really passionate about being able to work in a place where they could be their full human selves, and not have to have a work version of them and an out of work version of them. And when you are working in tech, one of the things that you quickly realize is that you're serving a really broad audience often. And so having a lot of different types of people on the team to be able to speak to and understand the needs of a really broad audience is super key. So I think that, being in that environment really started my education around DEI. But then specifically from a personal experience standpoint, being a young, non-Ivy League educated woman of color in New York City in the tech space, where it is overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male, a lot of Ivy League, graduates make up the tech space. I often was really one of the only people that sort of looked like me, but more importantly, just had similar life experiences, similar upbringings in the workspaces that I was in. And at first, I've lived in I grew up in so many different types of environments that I have, for the most part, always learned to adapt. I think even when I worked in overwhelmingly male offices, I figured out how to connect and adapt and I've had fairly good experiences, but I think what shifted for me was as things out in the world started to sort of become more divided, as we saw, the rise of Black Lives Matter and just like police violence in the U.S. really come to the forefront. I started to really see that there was a big divide between people, my colleagues at work, who had these lived experiences or had these identities that were being kind of covered front and center in the news, and those who didn't, and how much they cared, but also how much it was impacting myself and my colleagues, just sort of the mental exhaustion of seeing these things on the news and then coming to work and having to sort of pretend like you were okay and that it wasn't upsetting, it wasn't wearing on your mental health. And it was the first time at work where I started to really feel alone, and like I didn't have people to relate to, or managers that really understood what I was carrying. And, it's different than when our parents were in the workplace. Now we spend so much of our waking hours working and like online and engaging with our colleagues that, I'm spending more time at work than I am at home or with my family and friends. So to go there and feel like not seen or understood, I think it does wear on you. And so I've always been the type of person that is like, okay, if someone's not doing it, then I can step up and help or try to do something or fix the problem. And so I got really involved in employee-led initiatives for our companies to speak out more around things that we saw that were happening in the world that were not okay, and to make sure that we were really thinking about what employees needed to be able to do their best work and feel supported at work. And yeah, it just became a passion point for me and something that I realized I was really good at. And it inspired me to sort of take a leap of faith and quit my job and start Collective. And 4.5 years later, I'm lucky to be still getting to do what I love with like an amazing team that keeps growing and is also equally committed.
I love that. So there's so much to unpack there. So let's take it down to a little bit by side. So you kind of started with, first off, when I was at HR Transform, Kellie was a speaker there and she had a room packed listening to her talk about DEI. So she's very knowledgeable in the space, obviously based off the business. So when did you realize that DEI could move from just being something that you could do and try to transform the business you're into, like, you know what, I actually see a problem that I can solve, not just for my company, be the change helping all these companies around the US and in the world?
Yeah. When I started out doing the work, again, it was trying to solve a problem that I was experiencing. And what I got to see firsthand was how much, how thoughtful, how intuitive, how smart my colleagues were in not just sort of highlighting themes around issues that they were seeing within the organization in terms of getting the support that they needed to do their best work and to feel a sense of belonging, but also the solutions that they were coming up with. And I started working in the DEI space around the time when unconscious bias trainings were really, really popular. Every company was like, oh, we're supposed to do an unconscious bias training. But when you would talk to actual employees, that often wasn't the solution that they felt like was going to actually shift their experience at work.
Can I interrupt you really quick? I apologize. Just for people out there, what does unconscious bias training, what does that entail? People may not know that.
So the kind of core idea around unconscious bias is that every single one of us is walking around with sort of stereotypes that we have about people who are different than us, or even maybe people who are like us. And the reason it's unconscious is because from a very early age, we are absorbing these messages through things that our parents and family members and friends are saying about people who are different than them, things that we see on the news, things that we see in movies and TV and in music. So for instance, it's the idea that women are more emotional, right? And so women might not make great leaders because they're too emotional to lead a team. That would be an unconscious bias that we might have, or a more conscious bias. Sometimes the bias, we know that we have it, and we're still like, I think men make better doctors than women, right? So, but the idea around unconscious bias training is that if we were more aware of these biases, then we would change our behavior.
Got it.
So that's, and it comes from a good place, right? Which is true. I think the goal of those types of trainings was to normalize the fact that we all have bias, that you're not a bad person if you have bias. It's, something that lives within all of us. And to try to surface awareness to it with the hopes that behaviors change. The challenge is that what we found is that being aware of it doesn't always lead immediately to change, and that trying to shift people's individual behaviors can only take an organization so far, that there are actually a lot of systems and structures, from the way that you hire and recruit people to the way that you promote and review people's performance, that also have a huge impact on how people either do or don't feel empowered to thrive at work. So it's one tool, but it's not the whole solution.
And that y'all can see how intelligent she is. She just gave you a masterclass in unconscious bias training. So you saw this training and you're like, hey, they're onto something here. This is just a small part or a small piece of the big pie that I can try to then make a grander effect on. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to go back to your question of when did I know I could do this for other organizations, I think what I realized was that in all of the organizations I had been in, there was one missing ingredient that was sort of making the efforts that myself and my colleagues were engaging in less successful or not successful at all, which was we didn't always have leadership buy-in. And so that meant we didn't necessarily have access to resources or budget or influence to be able to determine what course of action the organization took in addressing any kind of inequity or culture issues within the company. And so I realized at that point that I could only make so much of an impact being inside the company, and that if I took a step outside of my own company, of these companies I'd worked in, and started something new and presented companies with a framework that basically asked them to bridge the gap between leaders and the employees that are most impacted by bias, and just cultures that don't support them. If we could bridge the gap between those employees and leaders, and have them work together to create solutions that were meaningful to the employees, impactful, so really led to the outcomes that people wanted to see, and that leaders could say were sustainable and feasible for the business, which meant that it was feasible for them to invest in this work, but also sustainable in the long run, then we would get a lot closer to being able to, create solutions that truly, truly meet the needs of the people that are struggling at work.
I love that. So when you realize all this and you have an idea, when you made the leap of faith to then try to go from your company to start a company doing this, did you already have clients set up, ready to go? Or you're like, hey, I know this is an idea. I need to get the framework of the company going, and then we'll go working with clients. And the reason I ask that is we have a lot of entrepreneurs who tune into the podcast, and they always want to know how to take that leap without, potentially negatively affecting their life. But sometimes you just got to take the leap and have faith that you may have to go down 2 steps to go 4 steps up.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I always say, like, I'm the don't do what I did. I didn't make the leap. I think I got pushed into the leap. Which is to say that, when I knew that I wanted to do this, I actually shared my intentions with my boss. I had actually first tried to make the case that they should let me take on at the company a DEI role specifically focused on that. And the response was sort of like, no, we don't have the budget for that. We're not going to do that. I was like, fine. Is it possible to sort of step down to part-time in this role that I'm working in so that I can pursue this and see if it's something that I could actually be good at and make a career out of? And at the time, that looked like supporting other consultants in the space to just learn as much as I could and observe the work in practice. And that was going really well. And then my company said, hey, this is a full-time role. We can't have you in a part-time role. So sorry, we've hired someone else. And
was that expected?
It was unexpected. And I was like, oh no, I really have to get it together because I think, like, for some people, that sink or swim environment is what they need to sort of be able to make it a reality and make it happen. And for other people, dipping their toes in the water is a more effective strategy. I think for me personally, the sink or swim, it was sort of like, okay, like, what is the minimum viable product that I can put out into the world that's effective? How can I use strategic partnerships with other people who have been in this space, who have built up the credibility, and do what I do best, which is to build a really great brand that resonates, and to provide a new vision for how this work could be done, and not get super caught up on, like, having the perfect product or end goal before seeking out clients. And so, I think the way that the projects that we did looked back in 2017, 2018, look very, very different than now. And even now, I'm sure they'll look different in 5 years. So I'm a big advocate of, what's the least that you can do to start to prove whether your hypothesis works, and get it in front of actual people that can say, hey, this is good, or hey, this is bad. And here's how, it could be better.
So then when you started to put this hypothesis in place at Collective, what were some of the findings you found about, hey, this is what we thought worked and didn't work, or this is something that we didn't think about that actually we need to build into our program? And then how did you continue to iterate that program over time?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that I learned really quickly structurally was it's much harder to have a sort of marketplace when it comes to DEI specifically, because there are so many different approaches. So when I first started Collective, I had most recently been running accounts at a branding agency. And so I'd gotten this really great education for the 2 years prior to starting my company on, a brand strategy, how to create, a vision and a mission that really tells a story and meets people where they're at and solves a problem. And I knew I could do that really well. And I painted this vision for what I felt like DEI could be like, the approach that it could be. And then I went out and I found other consultants who had been doing this work for a while and who had been sort of looking for other people like them who shared this approach or this vision for the work. and I built partnerships with them. So they came and they worked for Collective as project-based consultants. And it was a really cool idea, right? Was that, as consultants, we don't have to work one off. We can partner with other like-minded consultants, and all of our brains together are more valuable than separate. And the tricky part is that the diversity, equity, and inclusion space is still, even now, so unregulated. And there's so many different ideas around how do we get to a world where things are fair and just, and, no matter what your identity is, you can be treated with a certain level of dignity and respect. There are a lot of pathways to that. And I would say there are even a lot of people who don't even think that that's what they're trying to sort of move towards.
Yeah.
And so I realized pretty quickly that in order to create a unified experience for our clients, that actually we did need people in-house. We needed people who were willing to sort of do the work in a consistent, unified way, so that clients knew what they could expect, so that no matter who they worked with, they were getting a really, really high impact experience that was grounded in the same basic principles of how we think about the work, and what type of world we're trying to create, at the very least in the microcosm of the workplace. So that was a big lesson. So now our team is mostly internal. We have some project-based people, but I think that was a big shift for us. And then just the offerings, I think one learning, and this is probably a good one for entrepreneurs, is I came in very rigid. When I started my company, I was like, this is what works. I know this, and this is how, and this is what I want to sell. Like, I only want to sell it this way. And I realized pretty quickly that even though I wanted to sell assessments and strategy, and I was like, training doesn't work, I don't want to sell training. Well, about more than half of my inbound requests and the clients that were coming to me were saying, hey, we're looking for a training, which meant that I was turning away a lot of business. And so I really did have to be more expansive in the way that I thought about how we could solve the problem. And I think being able to be flexible and be responsive to your audience, it was a good lesson for me in not being so type A. But it also led to us being able to have even more entry points for impact. And it didn't require me to sacrifice all my beliefs about trainings. I still felt like, and I still feel like today, that one-off trainings don't necessarily create long-term changes in people's behavior or a culture, but learning journeys do, right? So having trainings at a regular interval, holding people accountable to the behaviors that you want them to engage in, while providing them with the skills to learn how to engage in those behaviors, that is helpful. And so now we do trainings, but we're doing them in a way that feels like it's in line with, it's ethical, and it's in line with the impact that we want to have.
Yeah, because I'm sure we've all done trainings where it's like you do one training, you're like, that was kind of a waste of time. We're like, I'm never going to use that again. So it's like, how does you get that to make defined results, which actually is a good segue to my next question for you is, can you talk about a use case? Maybe you can't use company names or whatnot for privacy reasons, fair enough. But can you talk about how you were able to come in with Collective and make a significant change in a company, and what that change was?
Yeah, I would say one of the first companies that we worked with that was sort of a big name, and it was intimidating, but we were really grateful to work with. We came in and they had this very limited budget, and we did a ton of things for them that now, like, we would just be like, oh my gosh, we've probably lost so much money on that project. But at that point, I was like, really, like, I just want to show that we can have this impact. And I think what I was really proud of is that we came in and we did an assessment. So we surveyed the employees anonymously, and we looked at their demographics, and we even asked questions that went beyond just race and gender, because we know diversity is more than that. We looked at, did you grow up in a household with a lot of money or not a lot of money? What level of education did you complete? Are you living with a mental health condition? And then we did follow-up focus groups where we got into rooms with employees and just listened to them, heard them out, asked them questions about their experiences, asked them follow-up questions about the kind of responses we had heard in the surveys. And what surfaced was there were a lot of issues for them with the leadership team. Mm. And that's always scary, right? Because the leadership team are the people paying. They're the ones approving the budget to do this work. And so I think what it taught me was the importance and the value of integrity. In any situation like that, the natural inclination might be to sort of soften what you heard to make it more palatable. But I spent a lot of time working with the leaders to let them understand that they could trust me. And that part of that trust was that I was going to be super honest with them, because that's what they had hired me to do. And that nothing that they were hearing was an indictment. It was an opportunity for growth. And there was no judgment about them being bad people. It was, hey, these are skills gaps, and we can grow and fill those gaps. And so I was really, really proud, because the leadership team was able to then hear some really tricky feedback and build a strategy alongside us to address that feedback. And one of the things that we heard, a year later, was that when they did the survey again, that the experiences had changed a lot. That sentiments were on average 20% more positive than the year prior. And the coaches and the leaders had committed to being coached. And even now, when I see their product out into the world, I see even just the differences in how they portray different communities and populations, and how much more thoughtful and less stereotyped it is. And so it's just great to see how even just starting with listening to employees, sharing feedback honestly, and then sharing it in a way that isn't judgmental, isn't shaming, but really is offering an opportunity for growth, can have ripple effects throughout an organization.
I'm gonna give you a round of applause. That's awesome. I love to hear that. And that's it. And it's amazing to see, like, as you said, like, usually leadership and historically has been very unreceptive to such a change, especially when you like, how can I talk to someone who's in a suit and isn't going to listen to me as somebody down below them? So for you all to be able to then give them the results, to show them, and for them to accept that results for the betterment of the business, shows the impact that you're able to make. I'm sure that's just, as you said, one story across many organizations to be able to work with. So I have two more questions for you. I've got to let you go because you're so gracious with your time. As a woman founder of color, if someone is looking like you, or someone is not the stereotypical person that look like, what is advice for them that you would give them for them to want to go out there and reach their dreams and not be scared of a stereotype or be scared of reactions based off of anything that they may be dealing with or what they look like?
I mean, I think that I've been really lucky to have great advocates and people that I can turn to for advice throughout. And when you have that, it builds a certain level of confidence in you. And so I think it is a mixture of, a lot of people talk about finding mentors. And I think finding mentors is incredibly important. Other people who have walked that path, who who kind of have the experiences that they can share and give advice. But I think having peer support is just as important, if not more important. So having other people, finding other people like you, who are kind of taking that leap of faith, who are going and putting themselves out there, just so that you all can provide each other mutual support, because it can be lonely starting something new, and a lot of people around you are not going to understand it. They're going to, I remember my aunt being like, you need to go ask for your job back. Tell them you'll work full time, tell them you'll work overtime. Right. And now she's like, I can't, I'm so proud of you. Right. And so there are a lot of people who aren't going to get it until they see it and they see the success. And so having someone else or other people around you that you can build community with, that are, going on a similar journey, is really important. And then the last group is finding sponsors. So finding people who aren't like you, that just are excited and interested in helping to lift people, founders especially, who don't have traditional pathways to entrepreneurship, or have been historically marginalized or underrepresented. Finding a mentor that is eager to kind of lift those communities up, I think is hugely important. Because oftentimes, I say, like, have the audacity of like a white man, to ask for like money that you deserve. And I think sometimes, people from communities that have been marginalized, we don't necessarily know what to ask for, what's okay to say, to demand, when you're working with investors, right? And there are people who have been doing these types of things for a long time and can kind of give you that guidance. Because like they have been in those rooms, right? And they've had those opportunities sent their way more organically.
And I think you said a really big buzzword, finding mentors and finding sponsors. A lot of entrepreneurs who come on here say the same thing, is having someone who's walked the shoes or supports you to be able to provide you the guidance to help. So I'm glad that you said that. I expected that. That's great to hear. So I'm going to give you 1 minute, and this is how I end all the podcasts, is talking about the topic you came on and giving you 1 minute as a forward future look. So what do you think the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, looks like moving forward?
I think my hope, and this is going to sound super fluffy, but I think it's sort of at the core of what we do, is I think there's a lot of healing to be done. We talk a lot about kind of bias and like even growth. And I think, especially with everything going on around the world, there's so much division and there's so much sort of uncertainty. And I think that there's a lot of, and what I've seen a lot of is people sort of retreating to groups that are like them, right? We are seeing a lot more people say, hey, I'm worried about interacting with this other person because I don't want to be canceled. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Even with the best intentions, they're like, I just don't want to hurt somebody. And I think being able to really start to think about what it is that we need as a society, as individuals, to be able to really see sort of the humanity in each other, and get to the root of what makes us feel disconnected or makes us feel hurt. Because I think a lot of times when we do see sort of the hatred or the bias or the division, it's coming from a place of people not getting what they need or not knowing how to get what they need. And so I just think that there's a lot of healing that we have to do as a society to figure out a better pathway forward.
I think that's very well said. I'm going to leave it at that because that was perfect. Kellie, thank you so much for coming on today. You've been amazing to talk to and share DEI with everybody. If people want to look up Collective or look up yourself and ask questions, learn more, how can they do that?
Yeah, so you can visit us at our website. It is hello-collective.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Collective DEI.
And all this will be in the bio, however you're watching or listening. Thank you so much, Kellie. This is the Leap of Faith podcast. Please do go like and subscribe to Everything Collective. Please do like and subscribe Everything Leap of Faith on audio or socials. And of course, on our YouTube channel where you're watching this video, or if you're listening in the ears. Kellie, I'm going to have you do the sign off with me. So please repeat after me. Stay healthy.
Stay healthy.
Stay wealthy.
Stay wealthy.
And have a good week, fans.
And have a good week, fans.
Deuces.